Have you ever looked at the partner sleeping beside you and wondered how many masks they wear? I am going to take you into a waking nightmare that will completely redefine the word betrayal. You think catching a cheating spouse is the ultimate pain? Just wait. What happened to me was a ruthless plot hidden beneath the most romantic facade imaginable. Sit tight and listen to the very end. The final twist will leave you breathless. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now let's begin the story. My name is Leah Gordon. I am 34 years old and I make my living building impenetrable digital walls. As the Director of Security Software Architecture at Auratech Synergies, one of the most powerful technology conglomerates in the nation, my days are consumed by paranoia. My job is to design invisible fortresses to protect billions of dollars in proprietary assets and intellectual property. I am rigorously trained to anticipate malicious threats, to locate zero-day vulnerabilities before the dark web syndicates do, and to trust absolutely no one who attempts to breach my systems. Yet in the quiet sanctuary of my personal life, I willingly left every single firewall disabled. My wife Chloe was the reason I let my guard down so completely. We had been married for 4 deeply passionate years. Chloe was a private art consultant catering to an ultra-wealthy clientele, a woman whose entire existence seemed flawlessly curated for high society elegance, while my reality was constructed of cold algorithms, threat assessments, and sterile server rooms. Her reality was a whirlwind of vibrant abstract canvases, exclusive gallery openings, and effortless magnetic charm. We shared a sprawling penthouse overlooking the glittering city skyline, a multi-million-dollar sanctuary I purchased for us. It was meticulously filled with the brilliant artwork she sourced and the intoxicating warmth she provided every time I walked through the door. To the outside world, and certainly to myself, we were the ultimate untouchable power couple. There was a highly specific, luxurious rhythm to our domestic life, marked by a rather eccentric tradition. Every single Friday, without fail, at exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the lobby concierge would send a specialized floral delivery up the private elevator. It was never just a standard bouquet. It was always an extravagant, breathtaking arrangement of rare orchids. We received ghost orchids, gold of Kinabalu and Shenzhen Nongke varieties that cost thousands of dollars just to cultivate. Chloe would always be the one waiting to sign for them. Her face would light up with genuine, radiant delight as she carefully arranged the exotic blooms on our massive marble kitchen island. When I first asked her about the absurd expense of these weekly deliveries, she gave me a dazzling smile and wrapped her arms around my neck. "It is a special perk from the Global Botanical Society I joined," she explained, her tone smooth as silk. "I am a Tier 1 VIP member, darling. They simply know how to properly spoil their elite." I never questioned the logic. Why would I? In our specific tax bracket, ridiculous luxury subscriptions and exclusive club perks were entirely standard behavior. However, a seasoned security architect is naturally wired to detect anomalies in any system. About 6 months ago, the secure baseline of our marriage began to shift imperceptibly. It started with innocent-sounding inquiries. We would be sitting together on the velvet living room sofa sharing a drink, and she would casually ask, "So how exactly does Auratech keep the new stealth malware projects entirely quarantined from the main corporate servers?" At first, I was simply flattered she was taking an interest in my highly technical, often boring career. But over time, the questions grew dangerously specific, probing deeply into biometric access protocols and executive security clearances. Then came the physical behavioral tells. If I walked into our master bedroom unexpectedly, her phone screen would instantly go black. She would place the device face down on the nightstand with a subtle, yet undeniably panicked swiftness. "Just clearing out some spam emails," she would say, her voice pitching just a fraction of a percent higher than her normal register. Furthermore, my internal alarms were triggered by strange anomalies in our shared wealth management portfolio. I discovered completely unaccounted expenses. Tens of thousands of dollars were quietly being moved out of our joint investment accounts. When I gently confronted her about the missing funds, she flawlessly played the role of the stressed, overworked professional. "It is just escrow holding for a private gallery acquisition in Europe, Leah. The international wire transfers are always a complete nightmare to reconcile." She sighed dramatically, rubbing her temples. I wanted to believe her. Because I loved her, I actively chose to believe her. I forced myself to ignore my own professional instincts. I aggressively silenced the warning sirens blaring in the back of my mind. That willful ignorance lasted until a brisk, overcast afternoon in late autumn. It was a Friday. I had a grueling executive board meeting scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but the chief executive officer had a sudden family emergency, and the entire briefing was abruptly scrapped. I found myself sitting in my office with a rare, completely empty afternoon. Looking at the wall clock, I saw it was only 3 o'clock. I made a spontaneous decision. I would head home early, pick up a bottle of her absolute favorite vintage wine along the way, and surprise my beautiful wife before her weekly botanical delivery arrived. I walked out of the towering Oratech glass doors, feeling a warm rush of affection, completely unaware that I was walking straight into the epicenter of my own total destruction. I truly believed I was going home to my loving sanctuary. Instead, I was about to unlock the front door and step directly into a living hell. I keyed my biometric entry into the penthouse just past 3:30 in the afternoon. The massive apartment was draped in the quiet stillness of mid-afternoon luxury. Chloe was not back from her gallery yet. The only sound was the low hum of the climate control system and the faint murmur of city traffic far below. I set the expensive vintage wine on the marble island and poured myself a glass of iced water, anticipating the look of pleasant surprise on her face. At exactly 4 o'clock, the private elevator chimed. The heavy oak door slid open to reveal the building concierge holding this week's botanical delivery. It was a staggering arrangement of rare orchids, their pale petals radiating a fragile, incredibly expensive beauty. I smiled, tipped the young man generously, and signed the electronic manifest myself. I carried the massive crystal vase to the center of the kitchen island, intending to place it exactly where Chloe always did. As I adjusted the heavy base, my thumb brushed against something rigid tucked deep beneath the thick, waxy layers of the decorative foliage. It was completely obscured from casual view, meticulously wedged between the damp floral foam and the innermost broad leaves. My brow furrowed in confusion. I carefully pushed the delicate orchids aside and extracted a small, heavy cardstock envelope. It was sealed tight. There was no logo of an elite botanical society. There was no elegant flowing calligraphy. I tore the thick paper open. My hands were perfectly steady, trained by years of handling high-stakes corporate data crises. But absolutely nothing could have prepared me for the single paragraph scrawled on the crisp white card inside. I stared at the black ink. The words seemed to vibrate off the paper, burning themselves directly into my retinas. "The offshore account is ready. Get her fingerprint to open the source code file tonight. Next week we will be free. Love you, Damien." My heart simply stopped. The ambient silence in the penthouse suddenly became a deafening roar in my ears. A physical wave of nausea slammed into my stomach, a blow so violent I had to grip the edge of the cold marble counter until my knuckles turned white just to stay on my feet. My brain, permanently wired for rapid threat analysis, instantly decrypted the sheer scale of the nightmare unfolding in my hands. This was not a mundane, pathetic tale of a bored, wealthy housewife seeking a cheap physical thrill in a stranger's bed. This was a highly coordinated, devastatingly precise corporate espionage operation. The missing funds from our joint accounts, the sudden intense interest in my biometric security protocols, the stealth malware architecture I had spent the last 2 years painstakingly building at Oratech Synergies. Chloe was not just sleeping with another man. My beautiful, elegant wife was actively conspiring to steal proprietary corporate assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Worse, she was meticulously setting me up to take the catastrophic fall. If that highly classified source code leaked from my personal secure home terminal, the federal authorities would not look twice at the charming art consultant. They would immediately target the director of security architecture. Chloe was systematically plotting to send me to a federal penitentiary for the rest of my natural life, while she drank champagne on a foreign beach with a ghost named Damien. Panic, raw and jagged, clawed up my throat. I could not pull air into my lungs. The kitchen began to spin in terrifying, disjointed geometric angles. But the ingrained survival instincts of a senior security architect finally violently kicked in, overriding the shattered, bleeding heart of a betrayed wife. I pulled out my secure mobile device. My hands were shaking so violently, I nearly dropped the metal phone onto the floor. I took 3 high-resolution photographs of the card and the envelope, capturing every fiber of the paper and every curve of the handwriting. With agonizing, painstaking precision, I slipped the card back into its envelope, slid it perfectly into the damp foliage, exactly where I had found it, and smoothed the orchid leaves over the hidden strike zone. I grabbed the wine I had bought, sprinted down the long hardwood hallway, and locked myself inside my private, soundproof home office. I collapsed into my leather executive chair, buried my face in my trembling hands, and forced myself to execute a military breathing exercise. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. Exhale for 4 seconds. I repeated the tactical protocol over and over until the violent, uncontrollable tremors in my limbs subsided into a cold, terrifying, metallic numbness. At 5:30 in the evening, the front door unlocked. "Leah, darling, I am home," Chloe's melodic, sweet voice echoed down the hall. I stood up, walked to the small mirror by the bookshelf, and arranged my features into the flawless mask of a tired but devoted spouse. I walked out of the office. Chloe was standing by the kitchen island, running her slender fingers over the orchids. "Look at these beauties," she purred, turning to greet me with a soft kiss that now felt like a toxic, venomous bite. I forced my lips to curve into a smile, offering her the wine I had brought. Dinner was an agonizing psychological performance. Chloe cooked my favorite meal and kept my wine glass filled to the absolute brim. She poured with a generous, heavy hand, constantly urging me to drink and relax after my supposedly exhausting week at the corporation. "You work entirely too hard, my love," she cooed, sliding her perfectly manicured hand over mine across the table. "You need to completely let go tonight. Drink up. Just rest your mind." I played my part flawlessly. I let my words slur slightly. I allowed my posture to slowly slump against the dining chair. By 10 o'clock at night, we moved to the living room, and I feigned complete sloppy intoxication. I let my head fall back against the plush velvet sofa cushions, let my jaw go slack, and closed my eyes, forcing my breathing to grow deep and rhythmically heavy. The penthouse was dead silent. I waited in the agonizing, suffocating darkness behind my eyelids. Then I felt it. A subtle, calculating shift in the sofa cushions beside me. The incredibly light, cautious touch of her cold, trembling fingers wrapping around my right wrist. My stomach violently turned as she slowly lifted my limp arm. I felt the cold, hard glass of my secure Auratech tablet being pressed gently against my index finger. The biometric scanner chimed a soft, nearly inaudible tone of approval. Access granted. In that exact fraction of a second, feeling the physical weight of my wife's hand betraying me in the dark. The last remaining ember of love I held for Chloe was permanently extinguished. Only ice, sharp and deadly, remained in my veins. The morning sun pierced through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting harsh geometric shadows across the living room. I woke up with the phantom weight of my wife's betrayal still pressing against my skin. Chloe was already in the kitchen humming a soft melodic tune while brewing our daily espresso. I walked out, gave her a sleepy, convincing smile, and accepted the warm ceramic mug she handed me. I drank the coffee. I swallowed my pride. I buried the screaming, blinding agony deep within my chest, locking it safely beneath a layer of absolute, impenetrable frost. I kissed her cheek, told her I had a massive security patch to deploy at the corporate office, and walked out the door. Once the heavy elevator doors clicked shut, the grieving wife died, and the director of security architecture took total control. I reached out to a trusted contact from my early days in defense contracting, a former intelligence operative who now operated exclusively in the shadows of untraceable digital forensics. We communicated through a heavily encrypted, decentralized network. I gave him the name Damien, the offshore account fragments I had pulled from my compromised home network logs, and a strict 48-hour deadline. I needed a ghost hunted, and I needed it done without setting off a single tripwire in the dark web ecosystem. The dossier arrived precisely 2 days later, securely delivered to an offline drive I kept hidden in my corporate vault. Sitting in the sterile fluorescent glow of my office monitors, I decrypted the files and watched my entire reality fracture into dust. Damien was not a romantic rival. He was a highly lethal phantom. His real identity was buried under layers of synthetic data, but his reputation was infamous among high-level cybersecurity circles. He was a black market data broker, a shadow operative who orchestrated the theft of classified source codes and sold them to hostile foreign entities. But the kill shot, the single piece of data that finally severed the last fragile tether of my sanity, was a surveillance photograph buried deep in the executive summary. The image was time-stamped exactly 5 years ago. It showed Damien sitting at a dimly lit cafe in Eastern Europe. And sitting across from him, her hand casually resting over his on the table, was Chloe. A freezing shock wave ripped through my central nervous system. 5 years ago, that was a full 12 months before I ever bumped into the charming, sophisticated art consultant at a charity gala. Every single moment of our relationship was a meticulously engineered lie. The accidental meeting, the passionate courtship, the 4 years of marriage. It was all a flawlessly executed long con. I was not a partner. I was a high-value target. She was a sleeper agent deployed by a black market syndicate to infiltrate my life, bypass Oratex billion-dollar firewalls, and rob me blind. Every kiss we shared was a calculated maneuver. Every I love you was a tactical progression. Driven by a terrifying, silent rage, I bypassed my own home network security and dove straight into the bedrock of our shared financial existence. Now that I knew exactly what I was looking for, the anomalies were glaringly obvious. The money missing from the investment accounts was only the surface. Chloe had been systematically, methodically draining our shared retirement fund. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been funneled through a labyrinth of shell corporations, ultimately landing in an offshore trust based in a nation that held no extradition treaty with the United States. Deep within the hidden partitions of her personal laptop, which I accessed remotely while she was at her art gallery, I found the final pieces of her exit strategy. There were highly encrypted files containing digitized, perfectly forged passports, new names, new identities, flight itineraries booked for a private charter plane scheduled to depart in exactly 9 days. I sat alone in the dark office staring at the glowing monitors. The sheer, breathtaking cruelty of her plan washed over me, stripping away any lingering trace of humanity or mercy. She did not just want the proprietary software. She wanted to leave me ruined, bankrupt, and facing a lifetime in a federal penitentiary, all while she lived in tropical luxury funded by my life's work. Most people would have picked up the phone right then. They would have called the federal authorities, frozen the bank accounts, and screamed at the monster sleeping in their bed. But my grief had condensed into something far more dangerous. It had crystallized into a pure, calculating wrath. I was an architect of traps. I built digital fortresses designed to paralyze predators. Arresting her now would be far too easy. A simple confrontation would give her the satisfaction of seeing my pain. I did not want her to merely fail. I wanted to completely annihilate her. I decided right then, staring at her fake passport photograph, to play a terrifying game of high-stakes poker. I was going to let her believe she was outsmarting me. I was going to let her reach the absolute finish line. Let her taste the sweet victory of her long con, and then at the exact fraction of a second, she thought she had won everything. I was going to pull the floor out from under her and watch her fall into the abyss. I transformed my penthouse into a theater, and I gave the performance of a lifetime. Over the next week, I became the absolute epitome of an overworked, stressed executive. I manufactured heavy bags under my eyes by skipping sleep. I complained constantly about corporate pressure rubbing my temples at the dinner table. The board is demanding the new architecture deployment by the end of the quarter. I would sigh, leaning heavily against the marble counter. Chloe would stand behind me, massaging my shoulders with those soft, treacherous hands. "You are pushing yourself too hard, darling," she would whisper, kissing the back of my neck. "Just get through this final push. Then we can finally take that long vacation we have been talking about. Just the two of us." "A long vacation sounds perfect," I replied, closing my eyes to hide the deadly precision in my gaze. A complete departure from everything. Every single word we exchanged was soaked in a lethal, double-edged irony. She thought she was lulling a sheep to sleep. She did not realize she was feeding a starving wolf. While Chloe was busy finalizing her escape routes, I was orchestrating a digital apocalypse at the corporate headquarters. I bypassed the standard chain of command and walked directly into the office of our chief executive officer. I placed my secure tablet on his mahogany desk and laid out the entire conspiracy. Within 2 hours, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had quietly established a secure command center in our subterranean server levels. The federal agents wanted to raid the penthouse immediately. I refused. I explained that arresting Chloe would not neutralize Damien. To surgically remove a black market data broker, you have to let him consume the poison himself. I proposed a honeypot operation, and I personally designed the bait. Working alongside the top federal cybercrime unit, I cloned the exact directory structure, file weight, and encryption protocols of Oratech's core proprietary source code. It looked completely authentic. It felt authentic. But buried deep within the millions of lines of dummy code was the most aggressive, highly adaptive stealth malware I had ever engineered. It was a digital explosive device. The second that file was executed on a foreign server, it would not just delete itself. It would violently propagate backward through the host network, aggressively locking down every single drive it touched, harvesting all locally stored data, and instantly broadcasting a persistent, unblockable geolocation beacon directly to the federal authorities. I was not just giving them fake data. I was handing Damien a loaded weapon completely rigged to detonate in his face. The trap was primed. Now I just needed my loving wife to take the bait. I brought the infected clone drive home on a Tuesday evening. The biometric lock on my home terminal was already compromised, courtesy of my fake drunken stupor the week prior. However, the system still required a secondary manual alphanumeric passcode to initiate external data transfers. Chloe needed that code. I made sure she got it. After dinner, I sat on the living room sofa with my laptop open, pretending to struggle with an intense migraine. Chloe was supposedly reading a magazine on the armchair across the room, but I could feel her predatory gaze locked onto my fingers. With deliberate, agonizing slowness, I typed the alphanumeric sequence. I paused between each keystroke. I intentionally muttered the characters under my breath just loud enough to carry across the quiet room. Capital A74 lowercase b09. I practically gift-wrapped the keys to the kingdom. Then I abruptly snapped the laptop shut. "I cannot look at a screen anymore tonight," I groaned. "I am going to take a long, hot shower." "Take your time, darling," Chloe said smoothly. "You deserve the rest." I walked into the master bathroom and turned the shower on full blast. But I did not undress. I slipped into the massive walk-in closet completely shrouded in darkness and pulled out my secondary secure mobile device. The day before, I had covertly installed 3 microscopic high-definition camera lenses seamlessly integrated into the living room architecture. I sat in the pitch-black closet, opened a bottle of deep red vintage wine, and watched the live feed. The moment the bathroom door clicked shut and the water began running, Chloe dropped the magazine. She moved with a sudden, terrifying efficiency. There was no hesitation. She practically glided across the room to my workstation. Through the glowing screen of my phone, I watched the woman I had shared my bed with for 4 years systematically breach my firewall. I watched her perfectly manicured fingers type the secondary passcode I had just fed her. The system granted access. She plugged in a small encrypted external drive. A progress bar appeared on her screen. I took a slow sip of my wine in the dark. A chilling, triumphant smile slowly spread across her beautiful face as the transfer completed. She thought she had just stolen the keys to a billion-dollar empire. She had absolutely no idea she was holding a digital grenade with the pin already pulled. The final act of our twisted domestic play arrived 3 days later. It was a Thursday night just hours before the Friday deadline Damien had set. Chloe was in the bedroom, meticulously folding designer clothes into a sleek leather suitcase. She had told me she was taking a spontaneous weekend spa retreat with some wealthy gallery clients to decompress. I stood by the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, watching her pack the exact clothes she intended to wear while fleeing the country. "Do you need help with those?" I asked, keeping my voice incredibly soft. "I am almost done, sweetheart," she replied, not looking up. I walked over and gently folded a silk blouse, placing it carefully into her suitcase. "You should make sure you pack for all types of climates," I suggested, looking directly into her eyes. "You never really know what kind of turbulent weather you might run into when you travel so far away." She froze for a fraction of a second. A tiny, nearly imperceptible flicker of uncertainty crossed her features, but her flawless training recovered instantly. She smiled brightly. "It is just a short trip, Leah. I will be perfectly fine." I zipped the suitcase shut and patted the leather surface. "I know you will," I said softly. "Have a safe trip, Chloe. I truly hope you get exactly what you deserve out of this getaway." Friday arrived with the sharp, kinetic energy of a ticking time bomb. The air in the penthouse felt dangerously thin. Every second that ticked past 3 o'clock amplified the adrenaline surging through my veins. Today was execution day. At exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the private elevator chimed. I was already standing by the foyer waiting. The concierge stepped out, holding the massive, extravagant arrangement of exotic orchids. I tipped him, heavily signed the electronic pad, and carried the heavy crystal vase to the marble kitchen island. I had a very narrow window of time. Chloe was in the master suite finalizing her makeup for her supposed spa retreat. I moved with ruthless efficiency. My fingers plunged into the damp floral foam beneath the broad green leaves. I found the thick sealed envelope exactly where I knew it would be. I pulled it out, ripped it to shreds without even bothering to read Damien's final instructions, and tossed the pieces down the garbage disposal. In its place, I slipped a perfectly identical envelope into the wet foliage. Inside was a crisp white card I had written myself. The message was short, brutal, and designed to induce immediate blinding panic. "The plan has changed. Do not go to the airport. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is watching. Run." I stepped back, wiped the moisture from my hands, and called out down the hallway. "Darling, your botanical delivery is here." I walked into my home office, leaving the door cracked open just enough to see the kitchen island. Chloe emerged from the bedroom a minute later. She was dressed in a chic, understated traveling suit, looking every bit the wealthy socialite heading off for a relaxing weekend. She approached the orchids. Through the narrow gap in the doorway, I watched her plunge her fingers into the foliage. She extracted my envelope. The transformation was instantaneous and spectacular. As her eyes scanned the ink, all the blood completely drained from her face. Her perfectly manicured facade shattered into a million jagged pieces. Her jaw dropped. Her breathing became shallow and violently erratic. The sophisticated art consultant vanished instantly, replaced by a trapped, terrified fugitive. Her hands shook so violently the card slipped from her fingers, fluttering silently to the marble floor. She snatched her mobile phone from the counter. Her thumbs flew across the screen, desperately dialing a heavily encrypted number. She held the device to her ear, pacing like a caged animal. I could hear the automated voice from the speaker. "The number you have reached is no longer in service." She dialed again. Nothing. Damien was gone. He was gone because at that exact moment, halfway across the globe, the black market data broker was having a spectacular catastrophe of his own. My command center at Oratech had a live feed of the digital blast radius, Damien had just plugged Chloe's stolen drive into his heavily fortified shadow network. He assumed he was unzipping the core source code. Instead, he unleashed the apex predator I had built. The moment the file executed, my stealth malware bypassed his physical firewalls in less than 3 seconds. It violently detonated inside his mainframe. It did not just delete files, it aggressively cannibalized his entire infrastructure. I watched the telemetry from my secure monitor as the malware locked down his primary servers, encrypted his backup arrays, and permanently bricked his hardware. Decades of stolen digital assets were incinerated in a fraction of a heartbeat. But the true killing blow was the geolocation beacon. As his screens went black, my payload silently broadcasted his exact physical coordinates directly to international law enforcement and the Federal Cyber Task Force. He was entirely neutralized before he even understood he had been hit. Back in the penthouse, Chloe had no idea her partner was already a ghost. She only knew the walls were rapidly closing in. Survival instinct overrode everything else. She abandoned her carefully packed designer luggage. She sprinted back into the master bedroom and violently tore open the false bottom of her closet safe. She grabbed the emergency duffel bag packed with bundles of untraceable cash and the forged international passports. She did not bother saying goodbye. She did not even look toward my office. Clutching the heavy bag to her chest, she bolted out of the penthouse. She bypassed the slow passenger elevator and slammed her hand against the heavy steel door of the emergency stairwell, her heels echoing frantically as she began her desperate spiraling descent down into the subterranean parking garage. The hunt was officially over. The trap was sprung. The subterranean parking garage was a cavernous expanse of cold concrete and echoing silence. Chloe's frantic footsteps slapped against the pavement as she sprinted toward her sleek sports car. She clutched the heavy duffel bag of stolen cash to her chest, her breath tearing through her lungs in ragged gasps. She reached the driver's side door. Her trembling hand stretched out, her fingers just grazing the metal handle. In that exact fraction of a second, the blinding high-beam headlights of a black sport utility vehicle parked directly across from her violently snapped on. Chloe shrieked, shielding her eyes from the piercing glare. The heavy engine of the vehicle cut through the stillness. I stepped out from the deep shadows cast by the blinding light. I wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, my hands calmly clasped behind my back. I walked toward her with slow, deliberate, and absolute authority. There was no rage on my face. There was no sorrow. There was only the icy, hollow stare of an executioner who had just finished building the gallows. "Going somewhere, darling?" I asked, my voice slicing through the damp garage air like a scalpel. Chloe pressed her back against her car, her eyes wide with a primal, suffocating terror. She opened her mouth to speak, to spin one final desperate lie, but her vocal cords completely seized. "Save your breath," I told her, stopping exactly 6 feet away. "I have known everything for a very long time. It started with that beautiful botanical delivery. You really should have checked the inner wrapping before you let me sign for it. I found Damien's little love note. I read all about the offshore accounts and the fingerprint extraction." She flinched violently, as if I had physically struck her across the face. "But I did not just read it," I continued, savoring the absolute destruction of her reality. "I let you believe you were winning. I let you copy that proprietary software off my terminal. Did you really think a senior security architect would leave an unencrypted backdoor completely exposed? The drive you stole was a digital explosive? Exactly 5 minutes ago, your ghost of a partner plugged it into his network. My payload instantly incinerated his entire black market infrastructure and sent his physical coordinates straight to the international authorities. He is in handcuffs right now, just like you are about to be." The duffel bag slipped from her grasp, hitting the concrete floor with a heavy, pathetic thud. The sheer magnitude of her failure crushed her legs. Chloe collapsed. She fell to her knees right there on the filthy parking garage floor. The elegant, sophisticated art consultant was completely gone, replaced by a sobbing, broken shell of a woman. "Leah, please," she wailed, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured cheeks, leaving dark trails of ruined makeup. She reached her shaking hands out toward my shoes. "Please, I am so sorry. He forced me into it. He threatened me." I love you, Leah. I swear to God, these past 4 years I truly fell in love with you. You are my wife. Please do not do this to me. I looked down at her. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. Oh, Chloe, I whispered, a razor-sharp smile finally touching the corners of my mouth. I must say, I always found the romance of those weakly exotic orchids to be incredibly breathtaking. But unfortunately for you, my love for you died the moment you pressed my limp finger against that biometric scanner. Consider this my final gift. I took one step back. From the dark perimeters of the garage, a dozen tactical flashlights cut through the gloom. Federal Bureau of Investigation agents materialized from behind concrete pillars and parked vehicles, their weapons drawn. They swarmed the vehicle violently, pulling Chloe to her feet and slamming her against the hood of her sports car. I stood perfectly still, watching with immense satisfaction as cold steel cuffs locked around her wrists. An agent loudly read her rights, officially charging her with corporate espionage, grand wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit intellectual property theft. Her hysterical screams echoed off the concrete walls as they dragged her away. 6 months later, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corporate corner office, watching the morning sun illuminate the city skyline. The divorce was officially finalized yesterday. Thanks to the federal investigation, I easily reclaimed every single cent she had attempted to drain from our retirement funds. And I kept absolute ownership of the penthouse. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my hot black coffee. I smiled at my reflection in the glass. People often think that the sweetest revenge requires screaming, throwing objects, or inflicting physical pain. They are completely wrong. The ultimate, most satisfying vengeance is maintaining absolute silence, using your own mind as a weapon, and surgically stripping away the betrayer's freedom and future, leaving them to rot in the cage they tried to build for you. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support James Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.